let's learn about Bonnie Woods. Local author and history detective, Bonnie Woods digs up the stories of our past. Whether in the archives or in the field, her passion drives her research. Her passion developed in the hills of Milan at Trails End Farm, where the 19th and early 20th centuries came alive through old-fashioned storytelling and the writing of her great-grandfather, unofficial local historian Burton Coon. As a lifelong learner with a bachelor's degree from Bard College's Simon's Rock and a master's from Wesleyan University, Bonnie continues to take classes, earn certificates, and teach. Her passion for local history has combined with a desire to keep history alive, and for that, we share her passion and are very grateful. You can follow Bonnie Woods' YouTube channel and websites for more local history, and her books are on display at a table over in the side of this room, along with Dieter Friedrichson's postcards and some other items used in the research for this talk. Some of her books are for sale, so I hope we all have a chance to look at them. And except for asking everybody who's online to please remember to mute, I think I'm going to turn the program over to you, Bonnie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia.
And I will
Thank you,
get out of the
Clinton
way.
Historical Society, for inviting me for this evening. And I'll just get into it. Okay, here we are. We're at Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah DeGarmo's farm, a safe station on the Underground Railroad. For this beginning, we have two parts here. In the beginning, I will become James Marshall DeGarmo and will speak with his voice in the beginning, and then I'll switch over, come back to myself. So when I'm James Marshall DeGarmo, I'll put this on, and that'll be in just a minute, and that will be the only way you'll know that I'm James Marshall. But this is actually the date 1907, April 26, was actually published in the newspaper for a talk that was in honor of him, and it was for over 40 years in education. His students decided to honor him at the Hotel Manhattan, and that's where we will start. But it also mentions that he was going to give the speech that evening. James Marshall DeGarmo was known for being an orator, so he didn't stop when he had an opportunity to speak, and he was known for many other things that we'll find out in the talk. So good evening. It's my pleasure to be here. Here we go. All right. Get ready here. I am James Marshall DeGarmo, PhD. I lived from 1838 to 1919. It is April 26, 1907. My students wish to honor me. Thank you, DeGarmo students, parents, colleagues, and guests. I am so grateful for your recognition, but I cannot accept this honor in my name. I do accept this honor in my parents' names, for it is my parents who took action against poverty and slavery and raised their children to follow their example. Let's honor them at this festive event at the magnificent Hotel Manhattan. Here, we're going to begin with a quick look at the menu for the evening, and I'm sure you've all received the menu, and we'll have time to eat later and some dancing later. This talk is dedicated to the memory of my noble Quaker father and my sainted Quaker mother. whose pure and holy lives have been a perpetual benediction to their children. This little volume is dedicated by their grateful son. Now, you recall, my students, you do recall that that was in the beginning of my book, The Hicksite Quakers. For the evening, of course, we're going to refer to this little speech is dedicated by their grateful son. Oh, what an honor. I am so honored that the dedication from U.J. Alsdorf. What a joy for me. This evening, we'll begin with the DeGarmo March and Two-Step. 1897, U.J. Alsdorf, the descendant of slaves and abolitionists, whose family's farm, the family home was on the Underground Railroad in Newburgh. U.J. Alsdorf. What a pleasure that and an honor that he created our DeGarmo March and Two-Step. Who remembers the DeGarmo March? I'm sure you all do, my students. So here we are, listening to the music. And by the way, if you haven't heard, U.J. Alsdorf is now composing songs for the Hudson Fulton days. Those will come out in 1909. What you already know. This sounds familiar to you. You recall that speech that I made about, my speech was about everything I did not know. And you had some comments for me, and we'll get to that in a moment. My students from the DeGarmo Institute in Fishkill, you remember your days of study. You remember your days of play and competition. Maybe some of you are here in this photo. Wow, commencement week. Every year we had commencement week. And it wasn't just a day, it was always a week. In 1894, this was the program. And I am honored, and I'm sure all of you will be very pleased to hear that your teacher, my daughter, Mrs. Carrie Schofield, will be here with the orchestra tonight. And it's the Schofield Orchestra. Rhinebeck students, maybe some of you are here in this photo. Take a good look. And you may remember your teacher, Helen Reed Delaporte. She was also a student at DeGarmo. She was a regent of the Chancellor Livingston chapter of the DAR. In 1900, she was elected to the Rhinebeck School Board. She was the first Dutchess County woman in that position. She's at the end of the second row from the top. And a little later this evening, I am going to mention some information about my wife, before she was my wife, and also Susan B. Anthony, speaking about women's rights. So this was quite an honor for me as well as my wife, because we were very familiar with the struggles of women in the 1800s. You recall that in 1878, I received an honorary Doctor of Philosophy from Hamilton College. That was for my teaching of you, for my preparing you for future careers in science and also in education. How did I do? Some of you I know are very successful with your careers, and it's such an honor to have you back here this evening. And then a little before that, mid-1860s, after my wife and I formed the DeGarmo Institute. Princeton University honored me with a Master of Arts degree, and that was for the same reason, for preparing students in the sciences and to go on to college. And once again, this was at Rhinebeck. So, once again, we are focusing on you and what you have become. And what do you think? Was I successful? Were you successful with this, with teaching you the sciences and preparing you for the sciences? Here we are, DeGarmo Institute in Rhinebeck. That was quite a miraculous day. My wife and I formed this school building, this beautiful building in Rhinebeck on Livingston Street. I was the principal and the science teacher. My wife was Emily Drake DeGarmo. She was the English teacher and the manager of housekeeping for the boarding students. As you can see, the building was certainly large enough for boarding students as well. Unfortunately, Emily Drake DeGarmo cannot be here with us this evening, my late wife. I followed the Quaker way when I set up DeGarmo Institute, the Quaker way of education, in that equal opportunity for males and females. And here you can see there are 5 male instructors and 5 female instructors, 71 male students and 67 female students. This was in 1879 in Rhinebeck. Professor McGeorge. Professor McGeorge was my teacher. Professor McGeorge was also my boss a few years later. I became a teacher and taught at the Dutchess Academy that I had attended as a student. Professor McGeorge also inspired me. He was an abolitionist, and his talk certainly inspired me in that area. All you need to know, and our main topic for this evening's presentation, my students, here before we get to eat or have our music, all of this, we are going to focus on my parents, Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah. My parents attended the Friends Meeting House at Oswego Village, Moores Mills, New York. Very near there was the Oswego boarding school. I was only a teenager, and I was put in charge of that boarding school. I'm sure my parents had a little to do with that. Baskets for the needy. Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah, that's how they were known in the neighborhood. They were Peter DeGarmo and Sarah DeGarmo, my parents, who married in 1818 in Poughkeepsie. Now, my parents were known for helping others. They were Quakers. That was certainly a common trait that was expected in the Quakers. But one thing was that my mother would fill baskets for the needy of food from the garden. And of course, she had sons who could deliver these baskets, who were willing workers to deliver the baskets. And we can see this sampler here. The New York Yearly Meeting. Shadrach Ricketson, 1821 map. Really, I'm focusing here on the communication between the meeting houses amongst the Quakers. And it really was quite remarkable, this communication. And here we have the DeGarmos attended the preparative meeting at Pleasant Valley. They attended the monthly meeting at Oswego and the quarterly meeting at 9 Partners. And you can see all of those there. You also, the reason I have these particular ones here on this slide are that these were all that are very familiar. These were certainly ones that we spoke of and attended and had various relationships with these various meeting houses. And we'll speak of the others as we go further. And one item as far as communication. So when I mentioned that my parents, according to the meeting records, they personally did attend the preparative, the monthly, and the quarterly. Not all of the Quakers who attended the preparative did that, but my parents frequently were assigned that duty to go to all of those meetings. And one of the ways that communication took place was not only that of bringing information from one meeting to another, but also through the epistles. And one of the epistles that I am referring to is one by Lucretia Mott, and that was focusing on about abolitionism. So it was, and certainly was the topic for Lucretia Mott. And Lucretia Mott was a student at Nine Partners, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so here we have my parents. My parents, Peter and Sarah, they were members of the Quaker Meeting House in Pleasant Valley. My father's parents married in 1801 and appeared on the 1801 Clinton tax list. My father was a farmer and a tanner. My mother Sarah's parents, James Marshall and Elizabeth Gilchrist Marshall, married in 1799 and appeared on the 1820 Clinton census. Peter DeGarmo. Here you see, and this is just one of the meeting records that I found to share with you this evening. And this is Peter DeGarmo, my father, and it's attended it according to appointment. Peter DeGarmo are appointed to attend the ensuing monthly meeting. And that's one of the samples that I was referring to. My father had a tendency to reflect. He definitely had a tendency to reflect. He had a tendency to question, reflect. And all of my siblings, myself and all of my siblings, inherited this tendency. We would not stop with our discussions, and we had great family discussions and those deep discussions. So my students, you probably recall some of this in the classroom, and that's where it came from, is my father. So when you're thinking about that, and sometimes how, right, we maybe went more than you wanted to hear with our discussions, but that's how it was. That's how it came to be. And then, of course, Sarah DeGarmo, my mother, this is her signature. She was clerk of the day. So as clerk of the day, it was her handwriting in that book. And so this is actually her handwriting, not just her name. On the previous slide, it was my father. He was not the clerk of the day, so that was not his signature. That was someone else writing his name, but this, in fact, is her signature. And she was always in perfect peace, right? Peaceful countenance. However, unlike the rest of the family, she could not build an argument. But all of my science, my skills in science, right? I'm a science teacher. All of my skills in science came from my mother. And she would even help us boys with our go-karts. It was always her that we went to for help with anything like that around the farm. And even if you recall, some of you may recall about the microscope or the telescope that was on the top of the DeGarmo Institute in Rhinebeck. And of course, we had great fun up there with that telescope. But certainly my passion for science, that's where it developed, right at home. Here we have Sarah DeGarmo women's meeting. Now there were the women's meetings and there were the men's meetings. So there are the books for these meetings are separate. Of course, the record books are separate and the meetings were separate. And you can see that here, this is the same as the other. She's the clerk of the day, and then you can see the notes that she took. So not only is she clerk of the day, but she was also appointed to attend the next monthly meeting here. And once again, it's Sarah DeGarmo. She informed this meeting that her term was expired for which she was appointed to receive quarterly collection. So quarterly collection, and quarterly, those meetings were in 9 partners. The Quaker emphasis on practical learning. This was very important, and here you can see that not all children under our care are instructed in school learning to fit them for business. And those of you, my students, I'm sure you realize you were instructed with some of the basics for business, but you were also instructed in the classics and the sciences and many other fields at DeGarmo Institute. Rochdale. Rochdale is where my family lived. Rochdale, which is part of the town of Poughkeepsie. It was formerly Whippleville. It was named for the first owners in 1798 of this mill. And however, the next owner, his name was James Taylor. He named it for his hometown in England, which was Rochdale. Here is the house that was across from the mill. And this was where I grew up, down the street, right at the end of this road. And this is at the right near the mill, which was at one end. And you can see some parts here. Here we have my father's purchase of a farm. My father had 100 acres. This one here, the two added together, the two deeds together are added together, come up to 100 acres. This one he paid, it was 90 some acres here, and it was $4,600 at that time. And this was in 1824. These deeds, you can see them, a copy of course are over here on the table for display. And of course this shows that this of course is the right Peter DeGarmo Jr. His father had the same name, and it shows that it was recorded on May 22nd, 1824. And this was found down at the county clerk's office. Here we are, the agriculture census of 1860. My father's, our farm was 100 acres, and you can see the various farm animals that we had there on the farm. We had the sheep and the pigs, the dairy cows, the horses, and here. The potatoes, buckwheat, tons of hay. All of this is here on this agriculture census. Now, do you remember the fair? Do you remember the fair? Back in 1886, I was asked must be the top of the hour. We have our clock here. I'll wait a moment. Okay. It goes a little bit. There we go. Yes, that's good. Very, very good. The so I was asked to present, to speak at the fair in 1886, and I stood at the north side of Agricultural Hall, I wanted to reminisce about my days growing up on the farm and talk about the farm and the good old days and how they impacted my later life. But someone whispered on the podium and they said 7,000 people are on the grounds. So I sighed, then I waited another moment, and then I began. 7,000 people. Imagine that. Please, farmers, please educate your sons. It is important that they have time away from the farm for learning and exploring what else is out there to educate them. I assure you that it will benefit them in the future and that your sons will come back to the farm if you let them go off and do some exploring and learning. It is important to keep these farms in Dutchess County in the family. It is important for the growth of our county. And I walked away and I started to walk into the crowd and I overheard one man say, "That DeGarmo, he should give farmers' wives some advice on how to raise their daughters." That did get me thinking. Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah, a safe station in the old slavery days. In the old anti-slavery days, my parents' home was a refuge for the hunted fugitives, a safe station for the Underground Railroad, and a Black man owes his freedom, partly at least, to the cool head of my old father, while my mother's hand filled his pockets with good things to eat. And that is the map that we started with, and that is the farm that was on the Underground Railroad, the safe station. And you can see the arrow there, and you can see the PDEGAR, the MO in the copy there is a little light, but that is where it is. And you can see that it is to the east of 44 Dutchess Turnpike there. And you can see that this map is in 1850, and we have Whippleville there before it became Rochdale. Lucretia Mott, teacher, abolitionist, Quaker preacher. She was a welcome visitor to our farm. She came to our farm, Lucretia Mott. She was probably drawn to my father's skills in discussion. Lucretia Mott and my father both shared that ability to have a great discussion. And she was probably drawn to my mother's gentle, loving ways. Lucretia Mott attended the Nine Partners boarding school. And here we have Elias Hicks. All right, Elias Hicks. He had an association with the Nine Partners boarding school as well. He was on the school committee. He was also a parent of daughters who attended Nine Partners boarding school. Elias Hicks, an abolitionist who boycotted products of slave labor cotton and cane sugar. He was a divisive voice in Quaker meetings. The Hicksite division in the 1820s was a result of Elias Hicks. He emphasized the role of the voice within in guiding individual life. And I have here the dates, and you can see Elias Hicks, the dates there, when they lived, and that they were contemporaries here. And Elias Hicks with Lucretia Mott, the DeGarmo family, the two parents there, and also this is of his tour through Dutchess County. And also shows the other meeting houses that he attended. I witnessed my parents' discussions with Lucretia Mott. Lucretia Mott sat by the fireside at our house. I witnessed, recognized abolitionists. I heard women's rights activists and social reformers at our house, sitting by the fireside. Joining the ranks of abolitionists came second nature to me because of my parents' influence and what was happening in the house on the farm, in our home on the farm. Taking action. My students, you can see that I had many great and influential inspirations. I took action. When I was only 20 years old, I wrote for the Liberator. The editor, William Lloyd Garrison, was a white abolitionist and a founder of the American Anti-Slavery Society. I wrote a letter to the editor at that age. And if you can remember, I mentioned that my teacher was one of those who inspired me. My teacher, my parents who were abolitionists, Lucretia Mott, and the other influential leaders in that field. And here I was at 20. I circulated a petition praying that no slave might be sent back from the soil of New York. I don't know if you ever knew that, my students, but I was very proud of my work with the anti-slavery and as an abolitionist. And I wrote to William Lloyd Garrison and shared with him how pleased I was. Your visit to Poughkeepsie was highly pleasing to the Friends of Emancipation. So far as I know, we want earnest, honest advocates of emancipation, and they can do a good work. 4 months later, a week in Poughkeepsie, I wrote another article, or I wrote a letter to the editor of the Liberator, 1859, 4 months later. William Lloyd Garrison, Emancipation Day. In 1858, Frederick Douglass spoke, and this is in Poughkeepsie. 1858, Frederick Douglass spoke in Poughkeepsie. In 1859, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Liberator to share all of the events of that momentous week. It was a disappointing day. One day that week. It was when Susan B. Anthony spoke on behalf of the State Teachers Association. to promote equality in education. She asked for the joint education for both sexes recommended and the admission of colored children into public schools. She supports the women's right to vote. Anthony stands strong despite the depicted opposition. And it was even mentioned in the papers that some attorneys suspected that there would be an issue, right? A little of an uproar there at the convention. It did not happen. She stood strong. She appealed to the women to sign a petition to the legislature. She asked for a right to vote, resolved that women, like men, have a right to do anything and everything, which is in itself morally right. And here you can see my old professor, McGeorge. He was made chairman for the week. Susan B. Anthony made a short speech. And then an exciting time. Emily L. Drake. Do any of you remember who Emily L. Drake was? Emily L. Drake was, to you, Mrs. DeGarmo, my students, your English teacher. The president then announced Emily L. Drake of this county, Dutchess County, who spoke at some length, fully endorsing the views of the convention and advocating unqualified equality. Yes, that was your English teacher. That was before she married me. So goes the good work on. 5 months later, I will share with you 3 different sources. The Poughkeepsie Journal reports that William H. DeGarmo was appointed vice president. All right, and of course we had William McGeorge as president, but W.H. DeGarmo was my brother, my older brother. And I was appointed secretary. And also, imagine this, my students. There I am, Susan B. Anthony and James DeGarmo and me. We are both giving addresses at this convention. What an honor. The New York Times, the same convention. The New York Times didn't mention me. The New York Times mentioned Susan B. Anthony and mentioned that she spoke on women's rights. And then my sister, my big sister, Lizzie DeGarmo, Elizabeth DeGarmo, wrote a letter to the editor of the Liberator convention at Poughkeepsie. Now, Lizzie spoke at length. She wrote at length about the details of that convention in 1860. She spoke about Susan B. Anthony speaking and described that. She spoke about the Friends of Freedom have great cause for rejoicing at the gradual spread of the true abolition doctrine. The occasion was truly one in which the soul pours itself out. And then she mentioned, true-hearted men and women still live to bless humanity by their noble efforts in behalf of the downtrodden and oppressed. So you can see that not only did my parents influence me, but here you see examples of how they influenced Lizzie and William, as well as my other siblings. Lizzie ended her letter to the Liberator, "Truly yours for the right." Two and a half years later, the Liberator published an anti-slavery convention in Ellenville, New York. And once again, I spoke at the same convention as Susan B. Anthony. She, of course, spoke on women's rights. She was an abolitionist, an activist, social reformer, and by the way, she had connections here, along with giving her speeches here in Dutchess County and the surrounding areas, but her father, Daniel, was educated at the Nine Partners Meeting House. What an honor. What an honor. 10 years ago, in 1897, you, my students, I'm so thankful for my students, their parents, and the community. You raised the funds I needed to publish my book, A History of the Hicksite Quakers and Their Doctrines. I am grateful to you for doing this. I had been writing this book for many, many, many years, and it was a compilation of many of my speeches and writings through the years, and I did not have the funds to publish it, and you were able to make this happen. I was so honored. And I'm also grateful to Reverend Olmsted, the late rector of the Church of the Messiah in Rhinebeck, for his support and encouragement. And you may wonder, why would Reverend Olmsted from the Church of the Messiah, an Episcopal church, why would he be supporting me in writing this about the Hicksite Quakers? Well, after we married, Emily and I, we were birthright Quakers. After we married, we both became Episcopalians. We became Episcopalians in Rhinebeck, attended the Church of the Messiah there, and then attended the Episcopal Church in Fishkill-on-Hudson as well, after we moved to Fishkill-on-Hudson. Another exciting part in 1897, 10 years ago, I collaborated with Ulysses John Alsdorf. Do you remember? He's the composer who composed our school march. I was able to collaborate with him. I wrote the words, and he wrote the music for the Mason's Light Hymn, because we were both Masons. And here we have, these are images of his grandparents. But what an honor that was to collaborate with him. And if you think about it, from Professor McGeorge, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, Ulysses Alsdorf, I continue to take action through words and our actions through the years. My father's probing of questions stayed with me to this day. My mother's quiet, peaceful nature has brought me solace. And in 1898, years after first publishing and writing to editors, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Poughkeepsie Eagle News. I was concerned about the words that were being used to describe Afro-Americans. And I know the value of words, the power to degrade and humiliate, to bring dignity. So goes the good work on. Meanwhile, all hail to the Afro-American sentiment from an old-time abolitionist. We are near the end of my presentation at the Hotel Manhattan. Let's return to the beginning. Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah DeGarmo's farm, a safe station on the Underground Railroad. I was fortunate to grow up in a loving and nurturing home, to witness how one person, one family could make a difference. Whether my mother sent me off with a basket full of fresh food from the garden to those who were needy, or I witnessed my parents providing refuge on our farm on the Underground Railroad. Or I heard directly from the leaders of abolition, women's rights, social reform, or learned how to make an effective argument from my father. I was blessed with the tools of stewardship. And I still wonder about all I do not know. Now, I remember one of you, and you're in the audience tonight, my students, who, when I gave that speech, all I do not know, you said, what doesn't DeGarmo know? Let the music begin. I thank you again. On behalf of my parents and my family, I thank you again. Let's join my daughter and former teacher, your former teacher, Mrs. Carrie Schofield, and the orchestra. And of course, look back at that menu. It's time to eat. We've got some eating, we've got some music. A lot is happening now at the Hotel Manhattan. All right, and then I can take my hat off. All right, I am no longer James DeGarmo. I am back to me, all right? And Professor DeGarmo has finished his speech at the Hotel Manhattan, and we are back at the historic Creek Meeting House with more to know. And these are primarily 2024 updates. And this is all of the fun of researching and going in the field. And this is in addition to going into the library, going into the historical societies and all of that research, it's going out there and walking around and driving the roads of Dutchess County. So here we are on Rochdale Road. And this is a well. This is the well that provided water to the community. It is still there. And at the, you can see the footstone there. It's pretty well worn. And the middle picture and over on the other, on the left there, you can see those bricks. Those bricks were for the mill. The mill is no longer there, but there are, when it was burned down, there were so many bricks left over, and they were used by some of the places around there. That particular brick walkway is across the street at the old mill house. Now, if you look directly behind the well in that image, you will see the general store. That building is still there. It's a private residence, but as you drive and take a look at it, you can see that in fact that does look like an old general store. Wappingers Creek is right there at Rochdale, near the site of the dam. This is the house that is currently, I shouldn't say house, there are many houses on those 100 acres now that the DeGarmos had, many houses. The house nearest on Rochdale Road, right on there, is not an historic house. It did not qualify in the 1980s when the individuals that worked for the parcel access, when they went out, they determined that it was not historical. So here, that's an image that I took. That's the land, part of the land that is there. Now, if you could imagine the family, the DeGarmo family going from there, going down Dutchess Turnpike And you can see here, this is the office of the town historian, the mill store on the historic mill site. And then a little bit further on, you're going to see Quaker Hill Road in Pleasant Valley, in the Potash House, the Ammunition House. This is all what's there now, these historic buildings. And then Dieter's here this evening. And these are from Dieter's photos. And Dieter was fortunate enough to, well, it's fortunate that he got the photos. Definitely fortunate that he got the photos. I'm sure it was a sad day. And it's hard to look at some of these too. But this is the Quaker Meeting House. It was in Pleasant Valley. And this is the day of demolition, 2005. And I think this photo really speaks for itself. The foundation there on the right. And here, this beautiful display in the center, that's the poster that Dieter created. And it's fascinating. He put it all together there. This is on display in Pleasant Valley at the Historical Society.
You know, it's interesting. Previous picture. It was noted that at one time there had been a fire in the old meeting house, which nobody knew anything about. But when they started to tear it down, it was exposed that they had, at one time there must have been a small fire going on, which was not recorded anymore. It was noted while it was being demolished.
There,
Yeah.
there, that one, yeah. And then we have here. Okay, and if you travel on Quaker Hill Road, you will come to a parking lot, and behind the parking lot is the old cemetery. So the Quaker cemetery is still there, and it's on two sides of the parking lot.
Why was the meeting house demolished?
It was the Grange, it became the Grange, and then the area was needed for another building.
Yeah, it was, that picture you showed, that's now the Grange. Used it. Because the Grange had been actually in the Methodist church, which was on Main Street in Pleasant, which was also raised and made into a parking lot by the new firehouse. But since the Methodist church where the Grange was also located, was torn down, it was this new building now, which was erected beside the old.
So the Grange is replaced the old meeting house.
Yeah.
The Grange building, yes.
The Grange tore it down?
No, replace the new building that's there is the Grange on the spot, on that spot. Yeah.
Well, there was a bank just south of that was built next to it. At about the same time. So that they tore down a couple of houses on North Avenue, across from the mall, which now is active across North Avenue. There's a new building, and that's the bank. There you go.
Yes, those of you who are listening, if you can't hear Dieter is speaking about Pleasant Valley and some other demolition that took place around the same time, right in that area.
That's the church. The road in 1840, across the stream, to the location where it was located by the firehouse in Pleasant Valley. It was moved in 1840. And that Methodist cemetery, of course, stayed up there, that's still there. But the church building itself moved into town and put upon the foundation because Pleasant Valley is in flood zone. So it was raised up to prevent
Mhm.
any flooding. That might be, there was a big flood in 1838, and then another one in 1955.
Mhm. So Dieter's mentioning the flood, the potential for floods there in Pleasant Valley in 1838. And also the movement of the Methodist Church and also having to raise it because of that tendency to flood there.
Yeah, it's a question how they moved.
Mhm.
Whether the line in the creek, but either moved south and it was a ford, or across the stream when
Mhm.
the ice was there.
Mhm. So here we are at the Crum Elbow Rural Cemetery. It's in East Park. And here is where Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah DeGarmo are buried. And this, of course, is the meeting house, the Crum Elbow Meeting House. And here, this first line of stones on the right is not the DeGarmo family. The stones behind are, there are a few DeGarmo family members there and also some marshals in the cemetery in Crum Elbow. And here is a close-up version of Peter DeGarmo, Uncle Peter, and Sarah DeGarmo. And what a fitting stone for these two, who were partners in life and in death, and certainly had quite an impact. And that's why we're honoring them this evening. Quite an impact on Dutchess County and American history with their position on the Underground Railroad. Lizzie DeGarmo is buried near her parents. And we saw Lizzie, right? It's important to note too, the role of women in the family, in the DeGarmo family. We have the mother, Sarah DeGarmo. We have the daughter, Lizzie, Elizabeth DeGarmo. And we have James's wife, Emily. She was very active in the Quaker meeting house in Pleasant Valley. And she was a few years older than him. And she, of course, was in the women's meeting where Sarah was in the women's meeting. So her future daughter-in-law was there as well. Here is right now, 2024, that is where the DeGarmo Institute would have been. That's where it was, that little area there, or that grassy area, and most likely a little portion of the offices of the Third Lutheran Church on Livingston Street in Rhinebeck. 2024. These are all 2024, with the exception of those for the 2005 in Pleasant Valley. So here is the DeGarmo Institute now in Fishkill on Hudson. It was 3 levels. And if you can remember back to in the beginning of the program, it was quite a beautiful place then with the 3 levels. There was a fire that burned the upper level. So now it's an apartment building. It's still an apartment building. And here is a side view of it. You can still see the cornerstone there. And it's very, very big for the school, and it sits up high. It sits above the rest of the buildings there on that street on Rombaud Avenue in Beacon. We have, we're now at the Rhinebeck Cemetery, and the Rhinebeck Cemetery, this is just a child, a very young baby that they lost. James and Emily is buried there. And Emily died in Fishkill on Hudson. And she had the funeral there, and she was buried in Rhinebeck. And you can see she died in 1901. Earlier in the program, that date was 1907. when he was honored at the Hotel Manhattan. And then here we have their daughter, Carrie DeGarmo Schofield. Her husband predeceased her, and she was buried there with her parents. And that was in 1908. So that was just a short time after that date that we were using earlier. And then, of course, here is James Marshall DeGarmo, 1838 to 1919. He died in Poughkeepsie. His funeral was in Poughkeepsie and buried there in the Rhinebeck Cemetery. The bibliography is extensive. Yes, I'm getting there. Yes, all right. All right, so yes.
You mentioned an agricultural fair at Poughkeepsie. It's hard to picture where the fair could have been, but I believe it's where the Vassar Farm is now. Maybe a little closer into the downtown area, but it's in that area.
Yeah, and also where the that intersection where the sheriff's station is now. The let's see. The state police, yes, right where the state police, that area where that is now, that also was a location. Yeah.
Dutchess County State Police and
No. Yeah.
Washington.
Yeah.
The one in Arlington.
And of course, many, many thanks to Cynthia and Craig and the trustees. And we couldn't have been here this evening. Everything would have just fallen apart here without Kathy. And from the Clinton Historical Society, Shannon Butler, historian at Poughkeepsie Public Library District. Denise, he's here this evening for the president of the Friends of Crum Elbow Meeting House. And Denise was riding with me on Rochdale Road one of those days, right? We were exploring there, so one of these field trips. Mike Frazier at the Rhinebeck Historical Society. There was quite a bit there that he shared about the DeGarmo Institute in Rhinebeck. Dieter, you've already seen, and you may see more under the plexiglass on the side there in that table. Some of his postcards and his display, a lot there. And Mary Ellen and Suzanne from the Pleasant Valley Historical Society. Jordan Landis, the curator of the Friends Historical Library at Swarthmore. And I do need to pause there because what an amazing place. I've been there I believe it's three or four times now for research. And you can actually hold the original minute books. The records for Dutchess County Quaker meeting houses are in the Friends Historical Library at Swarthmore. And it's near Philadelphia. Yeah. Yeah, very near Philadelphia. And it's on the weekends you can make appointments. During the week, yeah, you should make appointments because they'll pull everything, and it's a great place for research. Diane Lapis, trustee at the Beacon Historical Society, helped with information about the DeGarmo Institute there in Fishkill on Hudson. Some valuable information. Vicki Labruto, historian, town of Milan. We're cohorts and trying to research more about Little Nine Partners, the meeting house up there in Milan. And Robert McHugh, president of the Millbrook Historical Society. I spent time there researching the Nine Partners and more about the Nine Partners. And this just goes to show you about the continued support of the Dutchess County history community. Robert McHugh mentioned to me, oh, did you know, he said, did you know that these records, these original records were scanned and are available online? And this, by the way, the site is a site from Canada. So these are the little things that we pass around, and we might not realize those without that community. And we return to Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah DeGarmo's farm. And that's it. Thank you very much. If you bring up the chat, where do I do that? Right here?
You can.
Thank you very much. I want to speak up here so we can address the people that are also at home, I hope.
Mhm.
And
Here, we can sit here together, Cynthia.
okay. But that was very, very interesting. And I wonder if you'd be willing to, you've already answered some questions.
Mhm.
Are there other questions either? Are there questions from,
No,
chat?
let's go up there. Oh, we had that in the beginning, I guess.
The first.
Oh, that
one,
was the one. Okay.
Is there an abolitionist? Is there a list of abolitionists that visited the DeGarmo farm? Was the first one.
Mm.
There is.
I have not found such a thing, but certainly I would always be, that would always be something that I would be open to finding, right? And always looking to find. And it's very difficult because as Quakers, the Quakers are humble. It wouldn't be something that they would be making sure that everyone knew that they had this, but we know that they were taught, I'm saying taught, that's probably not the right word, but they were exposed to abolitionism in the epistles and some of the pleas from some of the abolitionists like Lucretia Mott. But certainly there's a lot more research to be done in this field. And then we have a question, were there 2 meetings in these communities? Yes, one for Hicksite and one for Orthodox. Yes, that would happen. There would definitely be 2. I know here in Clinton, they're across the street from one another, the Hicksite and the Orthodox. Okay, and I think that's it. Are there any more questions? Yes, we have some here in the audience.
Still here and have you spoken?
let's repeat the question.
Yes, are there any descendants of the DeGarmo family still here? And have I spoken to them? No, I have not spoken to them. However, I do know.
Well, you just met Laura.
Yes, yes, that's true. That's true, but that's going to get to that.
Okay.
Yes, and then this evening, I just met a lady who is a descendant of a DeGarmo, but we're not sure yet. So we're going to have further talks to figure that out, where the connection might be. Mm-hmm. Yes, Vicky's mentioning the DeGarmo family in Pine Plains. There's a lot of DeGarmos, and there were a few brothers that came, and they were French Huguenots, and they came together, and they had quite big families in the area. And of course, we know, many of us here in this area, we know about the DeGarmo place and the different DeGarmo names on different streets in Poughkeepsie in that area. So as far as how they're all related, I don't know, but certainly that would be interesting. And I'm sure DeGarmos would be very interested in finding out this information. Yes. Yes.
Why or how did you start researching all this?
Oh, the question is, why or how did I start researching this? Well, just yesterday when I was a teenager, my great-grandfather wrote up in Milan, up in the hills in Milan, and he mentioned James DeGarmo and the DeGarmo Institute in Rhinebeck. He did not attend it, but he talked about some of the boys. They lived about 8 miles, so it would be 8 miles to Rhinebeck, and they would get to Rhinebeck, and then he would talk about some of the boys that were there who were attending the DeGarmo Institute. And he wrote about that. So that's how I knew about that. And he also talked very fondly about James DeGarmo. And he was talking about how intelligent James DeGarmo was, because he attended a speech by James DeGarmo at the Star Institute in Rhinebeck. So then that's how it started way back then. And then gradually I became familiar with the DeGarmo Institute in Rhinebeck. And it just seemed to come. It's one of those things that with research, you just keep hearing it from different sources. In Rhinebeck, Beacon, in different places, and that's how it all started. But then the key, and I think the part to celebrate here is that to identify that, yes, they were abolitionists. We knew that, but not only that their farm was on the Underground Railroad as well. So that was a good find as far as research, really special.
Any other questions?
Any questions out there in Zoom land?
Well,
Any other questions here? Yes.
What's the difference between a comparative Quaker meeting and a monthly meeting? What?
When in the preparative, they went once a week, and sometimes there were things there more than once a week, but then the monthly, they would only certain people from this location. So that only certain people in Pleasant Valley. They usually, I noticed in the meeting books, it was usually 2 people. So 2 women or 2 men that they would assign to go. Sometimes they both didn't go, because then I would see, and then in the next meeting, they would report back. So that was part of their communication system. So not only were the Pleasant Valley, the Quakers who attended Pleasant Valley on a regular basis going to 9 Partners, but other preparative ones were going to 9 Partners as well, to the monthly.
could I answer this?
Yes, you go ahead.
I've just done a lot of research on Quakers. So the preparative meeting was essentially the local meeting, and they were preparing to go to the monthly meeting. So they were prepared, and it was part of a hierarchy. So there would be a group of local preparative meetings that all reported to a monthly meeting. And then there would be several monthly meetings that reported to a quarterly meeting, which then reported to, in our case, the New York yearly meeting. So it was very hierarchical.
Were they all studying the same text
These
or
epistles,
discussion, or were they organizing practical business?
there were different things. There were the women's and the men's. The women's meetings were generally tasked with discipline, social behavior, making sure people behave the way Quakers should behave. And in this building, they met on, and in every Quaker meeting, they tended to meet on the west side of the building. The men's meeting would be on the east side. There were movable shutters that came up and down so that they met separately, although there was a pass-through, because sometimes they needed to communicate with one another, because Quakers always made a consensus. They and unless they then appointed a committee to work on consensus. So that's why we have the 2 doors, as they equally, men and women would come and go from the different sides. So there would be local issues when the men might be worried about caring for the building or having enough money to send to whatever the yearly meeting might be, asking for money to be sent to the Native Americans in Western New York. Or there might be other kinds of efforts that maybe they were supporting something that's going on at the Philadelphia yearly meeting. So there were those kinds of business items, but there were local things of making sure people were properly married when it came time. They went through a process of deciding if 2 people were fit to be married. So it was a variety of things. And then there were these epistles, which were really interesting, because the epistles were letters that each meeting, starting at the preparative, going up to monthly, going up to quarterly, going up to yearly, they had a group of 10, 12, 15 epistles that the yearly meeting wanted to know what they were doing. So it had to do with Are you free of slavery? Are you free of slave trading? Are you engaging in what they call the free produce movement, which was the boycott of using things made with slave labor? Or are there any people in your meeting that are dancing or, or behaving in a manner that's not appropriate? Are they engaged in business too and taking in too many profits? So there were these lists, which were then maintained and answered in each meeting, and then they reported that to their next hierarchical meeting. So it's quite,
And as far as epistles, there are many epistles at Swarthmore at the Friends Historical Library. I could be there for years. There were so many items there, and also there's a Lucretia Mott. There are letters, many, so there's quite an archive there. But Miss Landis, who I mentioned here, Jordan Landis, she mentioned about the epistles, that whole collection that's there. And that would be a fascinating read as well, to see that.
You didn't mention anything about.
I have a question. I have a question about
Yeah.
at the locations in Pleasant Valley. Visited a house in Pleasant Valley that is believed to have been a stop on the Underground Railroad, and it was just a block beyond the Historical Society next to Traver Road School. It's a brown building. And the owner brought us down to the cellar. Flagler. Her name was Flagler.
Flagler. So it was near Traver Road?
Yes, near Traver Road. It was on Traver Road in Route 44.
Right near the church? So right across from the church?
Across Traver Road from the church. And we went down into the cellar and saw an enclosure that could very well have been a hiding place.
I see.
So
Have you seen any documentation of that? Any writing, or how did you find out about it?
I think we found out about it through a flyer, a poster about a meeting in Pleasant Valley, an anti-slavery meeting in Pleasant Valley. And then we followed it up and met Mr. Flagler, and several of us went to the house to look. No, I don't have any other.
Yeah.
But that's how we found out about it.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'd be interested to see that.
and then we had a question here in
Yes.
our,
You didn't mention.
I don't think that, no, not in this talk, no. There's still more.
any other questions?
Anything else?
Well, once again, Bonnie, thank you.
Very welcome.
And thank you to our listening audience, as they used to say. It's a nice evening and really informative.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate you.